Hey, it's Zim, and should you play Quantum Protocol? Now, I did earlier last week a kind of quick playthrough and just kind of feeling out the game. I've finally gotten through the entirety of the main story, and I'm just going to kind of briefly go over what I like, what I didn't like, and kind of what the end game looks for you. Now, Quantum Protocol is technically a visual novel, and that's probably the biggest thing I didn't like about this game, is the writing. The writing for the visual novel is not amazing. Often you'll find like it will start talking about something that you have no idea what they're talking about, and then they'll explain it to you a little bit later, but not in very clear details. So if we look at like our operators here, we have a Dragoon, and they kind of like, oh, she's a Dragoon, and you don't know what that means. And then they kind of briefly explain it a little bit and kind of in a silly way. The writing for me in this game is not great. So if you are looking for a visual novel and you stumble upon this game, I probably wouldn't recommend it. I think this is not a great visual novel game. Now, that's not what this is all about, though. It's also about kind of a card game puzzler. Zoom out a little bit there. And with that card game puzzler, how is that? I think it's really good. It's done very well. A lot of interesting design choices, a lot of interesting puzzles, and a lot of interesting ways to play with these different operators. As I saw, we have 6. There's a 7th one I haven't unlocked. That's kind of through the end game. And each of these characters are going to have unique decks to them. And these unique decks are very different in their play styles. She's kind of more your straightforward. Queen is more chess style. Idol is about like kind of setups. Esper is playing from the discard and from your deck by using cards to pull from there. Leo is about mechs, and the Dragoon kind of mixes and matches. I will say that the difficulty in this game can definitely vary based on which operator you're using for these missions, because a lot of these missions, you get to choose who you want to be. Now, like in endgame, if there's a portrait of someone, you have to play that operator. However, if we look at another one here, if it's blank like this, it'll allow us to use all the operators. I would say that most of the missions are fine. Not very challenging in too much of a way. Once again, the challenge is really going to be based on your operator and how well you can handle what they're throwing at you. Sometimes I was playing Idol and then needed to beat it with someone else because Idol's playstyle was just clashing with what was happening. I will say that the one mission I do have a problem with is Judgment. Judgment is kind of your last mission of the story, and it's just really frustrating. So most of the time, you go through about 8 to 10 waves of just different puzzle stuff that you're trying to get through, usually capped out by a boss. Now, Judgment is about 30 encounters, closer to 26 when you take out like the little like healing phases you have on some like between rounds. But it also finishes with like a 3-boss end. So you fight 3 bosses in a row without healing. Now that gets pretty frustrating because it's oftentimes if you make a mistake early on, you're gonna have to restart because you can't take too much damage. It's also based on card randomization, so if you just don't see certain things, you might not make it. Like the run I completed with, I saw a health potion, and so that was big, because the 3 other runs beforehand trying to complete it, I never saw a health potion and would just run out of health by the time I got to the 3rd and final boss. So I do have problems with how Judgment was done, but Ascension, which is their end game essentially, is a better version of that. So let's go and jump into an end game. And so Ascension is very much what you're going to be playing for roguelike stuff after you beat the story. Once again, you get to choose any operator you want. And for simplicity, we'll choose Aurora. And we'll choose her basic deck. So, in Ascension Trials, we start out with this. You can play some cards, and obviously we have the bit cache, which we want to kill to get some deck building going on. So we'll go ahead and do that. Now, you'll do this 3 times, each time after beating a boss, and each route is going to get progressively harder, but you get to choose which routes you want to do. What this gets to show you is who you're facing at the end of the route and what enemies you're going to be facing throughout the route, which is really cool. Like I said, Judgment is very set in stone with enemy encounters, so eventually you'll just get to know the pattern and then you can build specifically for that. In this case, everything is, even though I know that there's ghosts in this encounter, for example, I don't know the patterns that are going to cause them to show up in certain different ways. My biggest problem with the roguelike mode, though, is these card sets. So these are the cards that they're also going to give you options to pull from. So you have your own deck, which brings its own set, and then it'll also offer you sets from a certain one. My problem is most of these cards only work in their group. So Mecha is only going to work well with other Mecha cards, and you're not going to want to buy Mecha cards if you don't see more Mecha. So, for example, there's a card called Drop Pod in Mecha, which pulls another mech from your deck. So if I take Drop Pod and then don't see mechs for another 2 or 3 rounds, it's just a dead card in my deck, which sucks. So I do have a problem with how this is slightly designed. I just wish these card sets would work better together, because I don't see why you'd want to kind of mix and match, but it does offer some interesting things. I also find a problem with some of these routes where you'll see duplicates. So as we can see, these bosses are the same. I've also had it to where it offers me the same card sets. So it'll be like crosscode music. So like your options are far more limited, which isn't very interesting. So overall, I think Quantum Protocol is definitely a game worth picking up, especially if you're into the card battler style deck building. I think it's very interesting. I think you can have a lot of fun with it. I think for the most part, it's well thought out and balanced. Like I said, the only real mission I have a problem with is Judgment. I've played Ascension a couple times and have yet to beat it, but I think that's also just experience with the game as you get better. And I do think there's some variants that can really screw you in Ascensions, but I mean, roguelites often have a problem with that anyway, where the variants can just sometimes get you killed. And I mean, that's just an expected part of the genre. So yeah, I think for $12.99, it's definitely a game that I would pick up and check out. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching. Let me know if you like these kind of 2-part split reviews, one where it's kind of shorter and concise at the end, and one where I give my initial first impressions, or if you'd prefer something more just concise like my should you plays normally are, which is I kind of go into the details and then do the reviews. So leave a comment down below letting me know what you prefer, and if you haven't already, maybe subscribe. Thanks, guys. I'll talk to you later.